How many of you remember what you did in 7th grade? Some of you do it, yeah. Okay, it's not that impressive. How about what I can remember about 7th grade? Way more impressive. So I'm standing back there a few minutes ago, and it came to mind something that happened in 7th grade. It was a reading assignment. And the story of the reading assignment was something like this. There was a movie shoot going on, and it was like a short 5-minute story I was supposed to read. And the scene described in that story was one of chaos, where everybody's trying to do their own thing. The director's yelling these instructions, and the first assistant director is doing this, and the second assistant director is correcting the first assistant director, and everybody's just running around, and there's a couple of actors in the scene getting guidance, and the director's trying to give this guy some guidance. He's like, yeah, no, you're doing it wrong. You got to do it the way Chuck Gibson did it in such and such a movie. And the actor's like, okay, And as this chaos goes on, and the director goes off to set something up, the actor sort of wants best wishes, Chuck Gibson. The director was telling the actor to do it exactly the way the actor did it in a previous movie, not realizing that he was telling the guy because he didn't recognize him. And the director at that moment in time thought that he was smarter than the guy he was trying to teach by using that guy himself as the example for the lesson. Kind of an awkward moment, wouldn't you think, if you came around like, wait, I'm Chuck Gibson, and you're telling me to act like Chuck Gibson? Come on, man. This is kind of weird. So, no surprise then that this happens with increasing regularity. It's interesting that story stuck from 7th grade, because I've seen that pattern all through my life, where I try to tell people to do things and they know how to do it better. Like my first year in college, when the doctor gave me a prescription for my bronchitis, and I said, I don't want to take antibiotics. So I ended up with pneumonia. But it's crazy, and I'll tell people how to do things that they know how to do better. Like when I argue with my wife about how to make something how to cook something in the kitchen. Like, no, honey, she looks at me like, you're the fat one, I'm the good cook. I'm like, yeah, you're right, honey, I should pay attention. But how many of us do that in our lives? You know, we tell our parents how to raise us. Ooh, that would hit close to home, I know. You know why? Because I got kids your age, I know how it goes. But it's remarkable how often we think we can tell people how to do something that they have spent their entire existence doing. It's no surprise then that when we get to John chapter 13, we find this exact same thing playing out. Speaking of what he's driving at is this very thing I talked about, trying to tell somebody how to do something that they know better themselves. Because when we ask the question, what does it mean to be a Christian? Is there a way that people can know to be a Christian? What does it mean to be a Christian? It means to be a follower of who? Christ. And to be a follower of Jesus Christ means that we are seeking to imitate him. So would it come as a shock to you that in trying to be a Christian, some of us actually try to tell Jesus how to do it? But that goes on all the time. In fact, it happened right here in chapter 13 with a fellow by the name of Peter. And if we know anything about Peter the apostle, we know that he is a rather impulsive fellow. He means well, but he sometimes gets in front of himself. And this is one of those cases where we see Peter, time after time, getting in front of Jesus saying, no, you're doing it wrong. How can Peter tell Jesus that he's doing it wrong? Jesus is Jesus. He's being Jesus. There's nothing else he can be, no one else he can be. But Peter's telling him you're doing it wrong. And this is what Peter has to struggle with. And this is a beautiful thing that's laid out for us in the middle of this chapter. We're going to take a look at this. In John chapter 13, if you please would open your Bibles to John chapter 13. We're going to cruise through this pretty quickly. We are going to be driving at this point here of what does it mean to be a Christian. Because Peter is having a hard time, and Jesus is like, I am the example here. You're supposed to follow me, not me do what you tell me to do. In a remarkable twist here. So we'll open up and we're going to jump in, and we're not going to read every verse. This is the passage, of course, where Jesus washes the disciples' feet. We'll talk a little bit about that. But we're going to jump right in here in verse 4. It says in John chapter 13, verse 4, Jesus got up from the meal. Now, what meal is this? This is the Passover meal. This is the one that Jesus had his disciples go and prepare. If we were reading the other Gospels alongside, we'd see that Jesus sent them in to make the preparations for the Passover. A dinner that was designed to celebrate God's faithfulness to his people and the delivery of his promise by bringing them up from slavery out of Egypt into the promised land. And so there's that Passover, as the angel of death passed over and did not touch any of the Israelite houses because they, in obedience to God, painted the doorposts of their homes with the blood of the sheep that they were eating inside their homes. All right. Meanwhile, the firstborn males of every Egyptian household fell to the sword of the angel of death, whether it was man or beast. So this is the Passover meal that they're celebrating that was prescribed in the Old Testament. You will do this to remember. And so Jesus is getting up from that Passover meal. It says there, he took off his outer clothing and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Now, you think about that picture about washing someone's feet, all right? It's hard enough to wash your own sometimes. They're all the way down there. So getting a little help from your friends is a good idea. But this is a completely different idea. Back then, when roads were not paved and very dusty and people wore sandals, when you rolled into somebody's house, your feet were a mess. And so it would be the job of the host of the home to provide some means for refreshment by having your feet washed, whether a servant did it or a member of the household did that as the guests arrived. But it turns out that at this Passover dinner, nobody took care of that responsibility. They had all the food ready, and they were, I'm here for the food. But no, there was a little bit more to hosting a dinner than just getting a mensef ready. I think it was, basically lamb, whatever else goes with it. But getting that Passover dinner ready, but there was none of the expected hospitality attached to it. And so Jesus took it upon himself to provide that. And you think about that, it's like, oh, that's weird. Here's Jesus, this great teacher, this prophet, this healer, and he's bothering to wash disciples' feet. Because why didn't he just, bark an order? Hey, Nathaniel, get that pail over there and start washing our feet. He didn't do that. He got up and he did it. And Peter catches on to it. He's like, dude, we screwed up. He says, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? Now, interesting thing there. Simon Peter recognizes the disparity. He recognizes that Jesus as Lord, and Peter's been pretty consistent about saying that as it was revealed to him by the Holy Spirit. He says, Lord, you're an important person. Are you going to wash my feet? And Jesus' response is interesting. He says, you do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you'll understand. And still Peter says no. See the problem there? When we're trying to tell Jesus how to be Jesus, it just doesn't work, does it? And yet we do it all the time. And here's our shining example, Peter here. It says, no, Peter said, you shall never wash my feet. Well, Jesus, being Jesus, had a gracious response to Peter. He understands that Peter means well, but he has to explain to Peter, it says, unless I wash you, you have no part with me. You can't be associated with me if you don't let me do this. Well, then Peter goes the other extreme. He just dives right in and says, well, then, Lord, don't stop there. Wash my hands and feet as well, And Jesus has to talk him back down off the ledge there, saying, those who've had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean. And so Jesus is trying to say, hey, easy, tiger, back down. It's not what you think it is. To be a part of me, this is what I'm doing. It doesn't require me taking care of something you needed to take care of. I'm meeting you where I need to meet you. And so this brings up the first observation I want to bring up today, which is this. Following Jesus is done according to his pattern, not ours. When we decide to follow Jesus, we have to look to where he's going, not where we want him to go. Not where we're going and asking him to follow along. That's not how it works. Following Jesus means go where he goes, doing what he does, being what the word Christian means, little Christs, little miniatures of our great example. And yet we still seem to get this backward. If you think back over the last 7 days, I don't think you have to go that far to find a moment in your life where you tried to get Jesus to follow you instead of you following Jesus. When we're brutally honest with ourselves, it is ridiculous how many times we say to Jesus, no, you follow me, you do it my way. But then Jesus keeps inviting us back, no, follow me, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. So now Jesus says, You don't understand, but you will in a moment. And now Jesus brings that understanding to Peter and the rest of the disciples. He says here in verse 12, he says, when he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place and says, do you understand what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. Remember, this is Jesus being Jesus. He does not deny the fact that he is their Lord. He does not deny the fact that he is their teacher. There's no false humility. Oh, no, guys, don't put me on a pedestal. He is who he is, and he doesn't back away from that. But he uses that to teach them the lesson that he expands on here in verse 15. It says, I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. So Jesus isn't all about being the boss. He's not all about being on top. He is about what? Serving others. And he says there, very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. And so what we hear from Jesus is that the pattern of Jesus' life is service to others. The greatest lesson that Jesus taught the night before he was crucified, he took the time to tell the disciples, and not just tell them in passing, yeah, you guys look out for each other. He gave them an object lesson, one of the strongest kinds of lessons that you can teach as a teacher. It's one thing for somebody to stand up at the front of the room and talk. And if all that happened was talking from the front of the room, how much would you remember? Not nearly as much. But we're told that if we do some other things along with it, like asking you all to stand up and repeat some words, you would remember that because now you've participated in that. But when Jesus goes to the extent of invading personal space to teach a lesson, that's a lesson that's going to stick. Guys, right now, go ahead and do that. We're going to do a little bit of visualization. I want you to visualize a room where Jesus and the disciples, so there's 13 men in the room, and they're all sitting around a table. And this table is about 8 inches off the ground. And in front of the table are pillows. And I want you to imagine 13 men leaning with their right elbows on those pillows. And as they are looking in to the center of the table, there are all the ingredients for dinner. There is the roasted lamb, there is the unleavened bread, there's the cups of wine. All the ingredients, the bitter roots, the bitter herbs, Ennet, if you know what that is. All that on the table for the Passover meal. 13 men crowded around, so they're all elbows in, and their feet are back towards the walls of the room. And this is when Jesus gets up. He goes and he gets a basin and puts a towel around him, and he goes around the outside of the table to wash the disciples' feet. Do you have that picture in your head? That is the setting for what's happening here. And the fact that you just took a few moments to visualize it means you're going to remember it more than if all you did was hear somebody talk about it. Jesus took that a step further. He showed them. He showed them with the very actions of his life. And it was the most natural thing for him to do. As the great teacher that he is, he used every means available. You can open your eyes again if you like. Or if you want, you can stay in the upper room for the rest of the message, because everything happens in this upper room. It's a beautiful thing. But I want you to see that the pattern of Jesus' life is in service to others, and he demonstrated it in such a visible, impactful way. Well, there's more that happens there in the upper room. Jesus expresses more of what's about to happen. There's a transaction there where he tells Judas that what you're about to do, go quickly, and then Judas leaves the room. And some of the disciples think that Judas has gone to get some more food because they're running out, or has gone off to do something else for the next day. Judas is sent because he's on his way to go betray Jesus. And at that moment, we're told that Satan entered him, and he goes off to do that. So now the room has only 12 people, Jesus and the remaining 11 disciples. And Jesus turns to them, and he says there in verse 33, he says, "My children, I will be with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and just as I told the Jews, so I tell you now, where I am going, you cannot come. But a new command I give you, Love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. Was this really a new command? Really a new command? Or was this really the point of God's commandments to the people from the beginning? To love one another. But I want you to see that he says, by this, all will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. You want to follow Jesus? You want to be identified as a Christian? You want to serve Jesus? Here's the biggest challenge in this whole section. Serving others requires loving them. Serving others requires loving them. But what does love mean? I think that's where we can just sort of say, I love you. But I want you to think about this. What is love? Love is a commitment. Love is a commitment. It's a decision that we make. It's not this poofy feeling represented with a kitty emoji. It's a decision. I love you. And because I love you, I commit to work joyfully. This right here is the hard part. This is the one that gets me every time. It got me this morning, it got me yesterday, it got me the day before. The commitment to work joyfully. You love your parents and you help out with chores around the house and you do it with clenched teeth because you're so frustrated. I'd rather be doing something else. It's not horribly joyful, is it? Loving others is meant to be joyful service for the benefit of others. When we read in 1 Corinthians 13 that love is not self-seeking, it is not rude, it is not arrogant. Love isn't about what I get out of it. And that right there is why the picture of love that we see in our culture today is so backwards. Think about love stories, romantic movies. It's all about what they get out of it. Each of them gets for themselves. Let me tell you this. The greatest love stories being written today are not being written by Hollywood scriptwriters. They are being written by committed people in service to others. The greatest love stories being written today are being written by people who will never get a movie made after them. It takes a lot of love to love people like you and me, because we are dirty, rotten, selfish sinners. Think about the people who love you and who sacrifice endlessly for you. Seeing as none of you hatched out of an egg, you've got parents somewhere. For some of you, you live with your parents. For others, you don't live near your parents. But somewhere in the world, you have parents. And they loved you. They loved you enough to take care of you and continue to be committed to you and your well-being. And so I tell you with the perspective that 48 and a half years gives you, is that love is a commitment to work joyfully for the benefit of others. It's tough. It's hard work. That's why it's so much easier to curl up and be by yourself and isolate yourself and cut yourself off. That's not what God designed for us to do, and He didn't design for us to be. That's not what Jesus did. Did Jesus show up on the planet and said, man, you guys are messed up, and then He built? No, He didn't do that at all. He loved His disciples. He got in there and He got His feet dirty walking around where they walked. And as they followed Him, as they listened to Him, and they learned, He loved them. So John is writing with the perspective that Jesus loved us so much that He was willing to die on the cross for us. Suddenly, doing a sink full of dishes doesn't seem too hard now, does it? But the idea that we commit to work joyfully for the benefit of others, that's what love is. And to see the kind of love Jesus had, I like this verse here in Hebrews chapter 12, where we're reminded to run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. And it says there, for the joy set before Him, the joy set before Him, He endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. That's pretty remarkable that Jesus looked at the cross and he scorned it. You know what it means to scorn the shame? To look at it and say, it doesn't matter. He scorns it like it's beneath me. The embarrassment that I'm going to be suffering by being nailed to a piece of wood, naked and abused, pales in comparison to how much joy I'm going to have because of the love that I have for every man, woman, and child ever created. He joyfully endured it. And in this, where Jesus has told them that he's about to go somewhere, and where he goes, Simon Peter picks up on that and says, oh, well, wait a minute, Lord, where are you going? Hang on a sec, we just got here, we're having dinner, you just washed our feet, we're just talking, and now you're about to go somewhere. It's kind of funny because Jesus said that, if you look in your Bibles there, he said that back in verse 33. Between 33 and 36, there's two other verses. A new commandment I give you. Love one another. Just as I loved you, so you too must love one another. And Peter's still hung up on this idea of, you're going somewhere. And so Jesus tells him again, where I'm going, you cannot follow now, but you will follow later. Peter, being Peter, just can't leave it alone. And so he says, Lord, why can't I follow you now? I will lay down my life for you. And Jesus answered, will you really lay down your life for me? Very truly, I tell you, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. And as you know, that's exactly what happens later that evening, or earlier the next morning, as they're waiting in the courtyard while Jesus is being interrogated and abused. Somebody points Peter out, and Jesus says, Peter says, no, I don't know that guy. And he says it 3 times, and then the rooster crows, and Peter goes away weeping. But here's how this wraps up. That following Jesus is done according to his pattern, not ours. That the pattern of Jesus' life is in service to others. And serving others requires loving them. And we pointed out there that love is a total commitment to work joyfully for the benefit of others. But here's the next part. Serving others is done according to Jesus' timetable, not ours. Peter thought he could follow Jesus that moment, and Jesus said, no. But where I am going, you will follow later. And what history tells us is that's exactly what happened. Some years later, Peter himself was crucified. After a life of service to the church, Peter was led out like Jesus told him he would be. And he was crucified. And as they got to the place of crucifixion, Peter made one last request. He said, I don't deserve to die like Jesus, so hang me upside down. And they crucified him upside down. And brothers and sisters, what I want you to think about today is this. To follow Jesus and to operate on his timetable requires listening to him. So 2 questions for you. First of all, will you take the time to listen to Jesus each day? Unless we tune in to listen to Jesus, we don't know what he's asking us to do. Jesus isn't here. How do we do that? He's not here in the same sense that he was with the disciples 2,000 years ago. But he has left us his word that we take time to read each day, to hear his voice. And then we pray and we talk with him. And we stop and we just simply ponder what he said. Just think about it and take the time to reflect. If we don't take the time to reflect on his word every day, we can't hear it. The second thing I want to ask you is, will you commit to obeying Jesus and serving others in love? Great if you follow Jesus, but you're not really following until you commit to serving others. Love is not a random idea. It's not this mere esoteric thought. Love has action attached to it. It has hands and feet. And we today have the opportunity to be the hands and feet of Jesus. Jesus wasn't joking when he said that the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and all your mind. And the second is just like it, love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus didn't take a breath between those two. to love God and to love others. You follow Jesus, you're going to show it by the way you treat your neighbor. And by the way, that doesn't depend on what your neighbor looks like. It doesn't depend on how your neighbor votes. It doesn't even depend on how your neighbor thinks or what they think of you. And who is thinks or what they think of you. And who is your neighbor? Anybody that's not you. May God open our eyes